Welcome to the Cyber Insurance News and Information Podcast. Today we'll be discussing overcoming challenges and protecting your business. I'm your host, Martin Hinton, and I'm thrilled to be joined by two experts who bring a wealth of knowledge on these complex topics. First, we have Craig Sikowski. Craig Sikowski is a CEO and co-founder of the Tech Collective and a seasoned executive with 25 plus years experience in IT, insurance, and fintech. He leads the Tech Collective, optimizing digital optimization for major clients. His strategic collaborations with corporate CIOs, CFOs, and CISOs drives industry innovation, product delivery, and key partnerships with companies like Fiserv, Truist, AIG, TIAA, Home Depot, AT&T, and Carrier. He has presented cyber solutions to the U.S. Secret Service at the Atlanta Cyber Fraud Task Force and has served on several technology boards. Joining him is Ralph Pasquarello, a cyber liability specialist with over 15 years of experience moderating, speaking at cyber liability and breach and risk management conferences. Ralph has hosted educational seminars across various industries, including operational technology and intellectual technology. Ralph's expertise is sought by businesses and critical government agencies. He advises the FBI, the U.S. Secret Service on the Atlanta Cyber Fraud Task Force. Ralph has chaired numerous boards, served on advisory councils, and been instrumental in initiatives such as the CARE Report, which he launched in 2024 after joining the Tech Collective in 2023. So their combined insights are going to help us work through a fairly complex topic. I hope I got all that right, but if I didn't, here's a chance to correct me. Did I get it all right?
Great. Yes.
You got it right.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen. And I think one of the things we've talked about in our preparation for this is the complexity of this matter. So off the top, I'd like to introduce the idea that the cyber insurance and security thing is something that is very much complex and can be intimidating for companies. And I just want you to explore that idea. Tell me what your thoughts are about that with regard to the way companies approach it and think about it.
So I'll go on the very top, and then I'm going to have Ralph just jump in. But so coming from a security perspective, there's more than just one conversation. And I think the conversation, as Ralph is going to elaborate on, is really broken, but it starts really with cyber insurance hitting. Many of us feel inadequate and overwhelmed, really unsure where to start. So you're not alone in this. All business owners face this, whether it's a small business owner all the way up to enterprise. And among, you have to include the employees in that journey. So Ralph, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on your thoughts.
Yeah, well, we'll go back to the beginning, why we started thecarereport.com, and because the process is broken. And like you said, Martin, the cyber insurance industry is very confusing. The policies are confusing. The applications are confusing. And there's just not a lot of expertise in the cyber insurance arena when it comes to the retail industry. And especially for smaller businesses. And hopefully we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And just, they just don't have the resources available money-wise to provide what they need.
Let's pick it up there. Let's start with a scenario. I'm a small business. I'm feeling inadequate, overwhelmed, unsure about what to do, and I don't have cyber insurance. What are your thoughts about where to start?
Well, a lot, I dealt with all different size companies when I wrote insurance. And the smaller companies, a lot of them are under the influence that, hey, we've got some coverage in our general liability policy. We're good. Or we have a $50,000 add-on for coverages for our limits in our general liability policy. And when you try to explain to them that, look, a $50,000 sublimit in a general liability policy is nowhere adequate. They just don't realize the ramifications of what can happen and the financial risk of when it happens until it does happen. So, the majority, I'm going to say 80, 90% of small businesses just don't know what they don't know, and that's the sin of it all. So
when it comes to building cyber resilience, again, if you're starting from nowhere, and part of this is security as well, obviously. You talk about the sort of overwhelming nature of a cyber policy and the sometimes difficult ability that is kind of hard to understand them. Small steps matter. So if we're going to start out in the sort of crawl, walk, run approach, how would I go about it? What's my first phone call, my first Google search? What am I going to do to sort of begin the journey of learning what I need to put myself in a situation where the problem I know that I face is one that I'm checked it against and feel some security against?
right, I would say you first start with your local insurance broker, right? Your agent that provides you with, your auto and your work comp and things like that, and to inquire what will it cost for a small cyber policy. Even a small business to have a $1 million limit for an insurance policy may only be $3,000, $4,000 a year to adequately cover them for what's going to happen, right? And $1 million may sound like a lot, and it is a pretty good coverage for a small business. But the thing that is most underestimated is business outage, right? Business interruption. Even with a small business, if you say, look, if you're going to be down for 24 days, which is an average, or 30 days, which is more realistic, what is that going to cost you as a business? And of course, the business owners are like, well, it'll never happen to us. We're good. We're a small business. No one would want to hack us. We have nothing, that they want. And that's a big misconception. It's not what they want. It's how can they make you fail in business, shut you down so that you pay to get back up and running. Even though you're a business that they wouldn't want any of your data, it's not the data. It's what can they derive from you after holding you hostage.
There's two things that you touch on there that I want to get at. There's the human factor that exists at the sort of leadership level at companies about the nature of the danger and the reality of the danger. And then there's this sort of, the myth of small businesses being, going unnoticed. And in fact, what happens now when big corporations can afford all the security is the small businesses become the vulnerable little fish that gets swept up. Is that a fair way to put it, Craig? Do you think that that's the way it should be looked at?
No, I think everybody's a part of that game. I don't care if you're a single business owner all the way up to an enterprise. Everybody could be attacked, whether it's a phishing attack. You've got to be DDoS attacks. We'll get into a little bit some of the abbreviations a little bit later. Everybody, it's not really a matter if, it's a matter of when you're going to be attacked. And I think to add on to Ralph's identification of how to start getting some of the cyber insurance, you've got cybersecurity as well that plays into that. And that's part of the conversation. And that's whether, encrypting passwords, making sure you have multi-factor authentication, VPN networks, all these are basic principles that I don't care if you're a single business owner, again, to the enterprise, everybody can practice that.
And again, putting it in simpler terms, we're talking about, you say business principles. And what we need to do, or what you would recommend, I suspect, and you tell me whether I'm wrong, is that these elements of how you operate your business need to become like locking the door at night and turning off the lights and shutting your computer down and, making sure that the air conditioning is turned off so you don't waste money making it cold when no one's there. Is that the sort of, holistic kind of mindset that people need to move toward so that it becomes, not a burden, but a natural function of everyday existence with these companies, large and small?
I love the analogy. Whether you're a business, you've got front doors, back doors, you want to make sure that the windows are shut so nobody's creeping in on your business. You would do the same thing being a homeowner. You want to make sure your windows are closed, locked, secured. You've got the lights on outside, same basic principles. You want to practice that, and you want it to be almost like muscle memory. You don't want to have to go down that checklist, although you can. You want that to be an automatic process on a day-to-day basis.
You touched on it, so we'll move on to it now. There are a lot of acronyms in this world, which, part of me thinks is helpful to understand them in a degree, but it also leaves people who aren't familiar with the vernacular and the language constantly having to refresh their memory and check. And I consider me guilty of that fact. So I've got a list here, and I'm going to look at it real quick. The first one on my list is business email compromise, which, of course, goes by BEC. What does that mean? Ralph or Craig, one of you could start. You guys pick. You can flip a coin. Who wants to take that one on?
Go ahead, Ralph.
So,
you can take that one.
so a BEC is when your Outlook or your email has been compromised. And usually how that happens is a phishing email, someone clicks on it, the bad guy gets inside your network, and now he has control over what goes in, what goes out. He's doing his reconnaissance. He's sitting in your email, watching things for weeks on end. He knows where your bills are going, where your money's coming from. So they're gathering all that information. And a BEC leads to things like invoice manipulation. We spoke about that last time, and again, it can affect a small company just as well as it can a large company. They're taking invoices, they're manipulating them, they're changing the routing instructions. They're watching every single move you have and every move you make, and they're controlling the bad guy, the good guy, all of those emails, and posing as the CEO of a company or the owner of a small company. So that it's not a lookalike, it is them. There's the old lookalike email, it might be Martin, Hintin instead of ON. Those are the old social engineering skills, if you will. The BEC is just another level. They're right inside your network. They're controlling things, and it happens rapidly. And most people have no idea that they're being breached, that the bad guys in their network. And the average, the average discovery time is well over, I want to say it's almost 200 days now, that you figure out the bad guys in your network. That's a long time before you realize that you've been
Am I right to say, Craig, that it's very important for business owners and employees to think that, given the reliance we have on email to do business, if your email is, again, remember what compromise means. It's not what you think. There's something inside your system, inside your home. The calls coming from inside the house. This is potentially catastrophic for business. The consequences for this sort of thing can be extraordinary. Is that a fair? I mean, am I being hyperbolic? Because I think that a lot of people hear this and they think, oh, we're just trying to sell more insurance and sell a new cybersecurity platform or whatever it might be. But the truth of the matter is, and maybe that you have some examples of ways this has happened that have been, to put it very plainly, bad for companies, large and small.
That's usually more of the common. It's not hyperbolic at all. It's actually spot on. I think that most people, they think that, look, I'm doing this. My email's not been touched. I don't have any interference. People might be in behind the scenes without you even knowing. So there might be things as, bots, manipulation, malware infections going on well before that. It's just the seed that's creeping up. So if you think of a weed starts at seeds, right? And they creep in, they crawl under, and we hate them in our gardens, but they're there and they'll choke at other pertaining plants and things like that. Same thing with business. They take chokehold on accounting systems, might be pertinent information, confidential information that you have. They can take your email and send malicious emails to others without you even knowing about it. So I think it's a very fair assessment. It every day, it's the most common effect. That's where most people start.
One of the types of attack or issue that we hear a lot about, and I think that maybe we hear so much about it, it warrants a good explanation or just a basic explanation, is the phrase ransomware. If a company suffers a ransomware attack, what does that mean? Explain that to me like I'm 5, if you will.
So it's somebody coming in, they put malware encryption in your data, and they now encrypt your data where you don't have access to the data, they do. So lock and key, they're switching the keys, putting a different lock on your safe, and now it's locked. You can't get into it. Your keys don't work. You have no way of getting in. So then they hold you hostage, or what we call ransom. And they might hold it for a value, whether it's for, Bitcoin, dollars, what have you. Now, if you pay that, then they'll give you the key to unlock it. But who's to say they haven't passed that combination of that lock to other people? So that's the danger.
The feeling is that this happens to large companies and people with a lot of information. But one of the things that it's important to note is that to do this commit this kind of crime, you don't have to be a hacker like the movies say. It's a fairly straightforward process that has been, I don't know, is democratized the right word by the internet and the spread of this sort of thing. Because the scale of this sort of crime, not just ransomware, but cybercrime, is astronomical. I mean, the number I've seen most recently is $10.5 trillion a year. And I feel like if that were any other kind of crime that was more visual and more stunning, that, it qualified for the, if it bleeds, it leads newspaper cover photo, we'd be hearing about it a lot more than we do, in places other than, cybersecurity and information security centered news organizations. Is that something that, you think needs a little more attention? And again, it may be a few $1,000s here and there, but it adds up. And when you have the frictionless environment of a digital economy, you commit this crime globally. Is that, again, I keep using the word, or I've at least used it was once, hyperbolic. Is that something that you think people need to be sort of thoughtful about?
Yes.
So
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to add part of that. Let me take the first part, Ralph, and I'm going to have you compliment right after that. So you said something, it's a cost, right? I don't like to think of you investing into that. That is, I take that back. It is an investment, and it's not really a cost into that security. So thinking about the results of what could happen afterwards, what are the damages? The quantification of those damages is large. So to make a small investment in the upfront is well worth the price. Ralph, maybe you can add on to that.
Yeah. Well, and to go back a little bit, large companies, small companies, it doesn't matter. I had a concrete company in Atlanta years ago, and I encouraged him to get a cyber insurance policy. He said, look, we're a concrete company. No one's going to hack us. And sure enough, he got a ransom attack. They held him hostage, and they wanted $25,000 to unlock all his information. At the time, the cyber policy, insurance policy, was $2,500 to buy the policy, which would have covered the ransomware, the ransom attack. The thing is that a lot of people think, well, look, we're not going to pay the ransom. We'll just fix this on the back end. We'll start over. But the game has changed, and meaning that they not only encrypt your information, but they steal the information. So now if you don't pay the ransom, we have your information. What do you want us to do with it? So now they have a hostage. So somewhere around 6-7 years ago, this started happening where it wasn't just an encryption. Now they had the information on board. And you don't hear a lot about this because people don't make it public. They don't come out and say, hey, we just got, unless you have to make it public. So in other words, with PHI, health information, if you have records that are over 500 individual records, you must go public with that. It has to be revealed. The same thing with financial records and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of institutions and regulations that say if you are breached, and like a ransom attack, right, where they hold your information, that is deemed a data breach because you have now lost control of your information. So there's a lot of regulations that go into that also, and there's also a lot of fines. When you have health information that's taken, now you have HIPAA. HIPAA comes in, and the fines can be substantial in the millions. So it's
I want to touch a little more on the cost benefit to policy that is, right for the risk that you face. But there's one other type of attack that I love. It's the denial of service attack. One of the things that I think a lot of, at least laymen like myself, think is a lot of these attacks sound similar. Like, how's ransomware different from a DDoS attack, a denial of service attack, or distributed denial of service attack? Tell me, first of all, start with, what does that mean? What for those watching that don't heard that word and maybe are afraid to ask, what do they need to know about that type of attack? How does it manifest?
So I'll put it in really easy terms, and Ralph, maybe you can elaborate after I'm done, but it's overloading a system that causes service disruption. So let's say during Christmas time, you're trying to log into one of your favorite retailers. I can hold them hostage by making sure that that circuit and the pipe that they use, I overload their systems so nobody can access their system. And guess what? Revenue is down because now they're held hostage. So they've got to pay me funds in order to give and lower that disruption on their circuit. That's the ABC of it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I keep saying this. I do know a little bit about this, but the way I think about the denial, the distributed denial of service attacks is it'd be like if you were a competitor to the Gap, say another retailer, and you hired 1,000 people to go into the Gap and make it so crowded that people who were coming to actually shop couldn't actually get into the store. So they would be like, "Oh, forget it, I'll go somewhere else." Oh, look, that store costs,
Great
if you
example.
clog up the system and make it impossible for legitimate customers to use it, and thus you make yourself, right for being paid to literally go away, if that makes sense. Before we get on to the sort of cost benefit of this, of a good policy and good cybersecurity, the consequences of these attacks, from things like reputational damage to financial damage, there's a myriad of them that, again, because it isn't a bank robbery with a getaway car or a safe with a dynamite charge and carbon charring, that it's sort of lost on us how much money can be stolen this way. And I guess what I always think about is that you think about how much money can be made this way, that could all be undone. And is that a way a business owner thinks, well, if I made $1 million on my website today, I could lose $1 million tomorrow because of the nature of this sort of crime and the issues around it? Is that a fair way to think about it? Or, again, talk to me about the sort of consequence of not having the right security and not having a policy to cover the damages and get you back up on your feet after an interruption of business or something like that.
Yeah. I would say there are several ways of when people hack you, right? It can be a disruptive hack. It can be a destructive hack, right? So they can put you down because let's go into manufacturing, where I have 500 machines on the floor all running at the same time. A destructive hack is where I introduce malware to those machines, to those systems that are running those machines. I can burn those machines so they can no longer exist. They can be bricked or, non-existent. That takes time to reproduce and to get the new machines in on all of that. Could take 6 months, could take a year to get back up into production, right? Or it can be just a disruptive hack, like a DDoS or something that'll prevent you from sending emails or whatever. The bottom line is that goes into business interruption, right? Where they're not gaining anything. I mean, a lot of the bad guys do things like that to put a notch on their belt, to say, hey, I'm a great hacker. Look what I did. I didn't make any money from it, but I shut that company down. So it becomes a badge of honor on your resume as a bad guy. What have you done, right? Why are we going to pay you? So there's so many different layers of cybercrime, and there's a lot of things that just don't make sense,
Well, Ralph, that's to add to your point, and we were talking about this earlier, and you were mentioning size of businesses. That's why some of the easier manipulations are for some of the smaller businesses, because they're due to weakness in their security measures. They don't have the maturity or the tool set that they're using, so they're easy to pick on, easy to get to.
That's something that I've heard a lot of. All right, so let's move on to something you touched on a bit early, Ralph, is the cost versus the value of a good policy. And it's things like, obviously people look at anything, and a business owner needs to look at every expense as a significant thing, and they need to consider it. But why is it a valuable investment? And what are the broader impacts of not being insured? And we've touched on some of those, but again, contextualize it in a way where people can feel easier about at least leaning into this process and thinking, okay, listen, I've got all sorts of insurance against all the risks I know about: fire, theft, workers' compensation. Cyber is, new to the game, but it is very aggressive risk and danger that companies face. So talk to me about the risk and the reward of having a good policy.
Right. Well, the risk let's talk about the risk. The risk is unknown, really, because it's changing all the time. Is it going to be from a third party? Is it going to be from a vendor? Is it going to be from a client? Is it going to be from an employee that clicks on a link? There are so many penetration points that a company can suffer. So it's not, and I've said this a million times, and you hear this a million times, it's not if, it's when it happens. It may not be a 100% strike, but if it's a 50% or whatever, how does it affect you as a business? Business loss, revenue loss, data loss, whatever that is. That's why it's important to do what we do. We benchmark. So if you're company A, your security has to be here, but your insurance is down here. Why is that? We have to look at the process of really doing the study and finding out what the financial risk is when this happens. And we need to not only try to prevent that security-wise, but if it does happen, how much money do we need to get back on our feet? What do we need? Who do we need to pay? Is it third-party damages, first-party damages, restoration costs, forensics, legal, notification costs? It adds up quickly. And that's why when we meet with CFOs and CISOs and we do our studies and they have a $10 million or a $15 million limit, and we come in and say, you need 30, it's an eye-opener. Because no one has ever presented that to them before. They're always being in compliance with contracts to meet contracts to do business, because the contract says, hey, Martin, if you want to do business with me, you need to have a $10 million cyber policy. Otherwise, I'm not doing business with you. So what does Martin do? Martin writes his insurance for $10 million. So there's a disconnect
between the notion of compliance and the notion of addressing risk that you're discussing there, right? And that's where, so you need to bring in and receive expert information about what your risk is and, the degree there's data about similar companies and problems they've had, and look at the cost they have. And it's in your experience, it's an eye-opener for these C-suite executives.
Absolutely. And that's where the global analytics that we have come into play, because we need to benchmark you not only individually, but your industry, the size company, the number of employees, locations, et cetera. All that information adds up to when bang happens, what does it cost? Well, it could be here. It could be here. We don't know that, right? It's not determined.
You touch on sort of one of our closing topics. When you're looking for a cyber insurance policy, you have to think about it differently than, say, homeowners or other things, right? Because we're talking about a completely different sort of risk assessment. To your point, and one of the irritating things I suspect for business owners is that the nature of the danger is very new, and new things evolve quickly as a general rule, right? The stability of the threat is still, it's global. It comes from other countries, and the types of attacks and the nature of them and the frequency, and whether your business is vulnerable or your industry is vulnerable, these things change with great pace. So policies need to be adaptable. They need to address the risk that can be assessed and analyzed based on the data available that you made reference to having. So tell me a little more about if there were, 4 or 5 things that a CFO should be thinking about or asking about when they sit down to do this or renew their policy that maybe you wouldn't have asked a year ago or 10 years ago. Are there any simple sort of, ideas or concepts that they should always make sure that they A, understand, and B, ask the right questions about?
It's usually done on an annual basis where they sit down with their broker and, hey, the business has increased. Now we're doing 200 million a year now. So all of your limits on your general liability need to be raised to that limit. So that happens every year, right? Our building is now worth X amount, or we have more equipment now. So we have a statement of values, and that SOV, there's another acronym for you.
I'll take it.
That statement of values, which is brought on by the controller or whoever, gives us a limit that we have to have for our property insurance, right? So, but none of that is done when it comes to the cyber insurance. Crime insurance, yes. Some of the other insurance policies, workers' comp and all that fun stuff, yes. We have to have certain limits. But there's so much guesswork when it comes to, again, I don't want to be too redundant, but the insurance broker comes in, he says, "Sir, how much cyber insurance do you want?" And the CFO says, "Well, I think I need 5. I think I need 5 million."
Yeah.
It's a guess. So, that's where the process is broken. It's been broken. I've been preaching this for 15 years. What is it going to cost? That's what we need to determine before we write the policy. So we have to go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's where it's broken.
So that's sort of a perfect place to bring us around to some closing remarks. Broken, the sense of something broken is a vase drops on the ground, and the chaos and complexity of all the pieces that you confront, and you have to reassemble it. One of the really, and I wrote this down earlier, and it's one of my favorite lines: "Are you an American or an Americans?" Right? We can do hard things, but the idea is that some things are hard, and they require complex thought and research and time to understand. And it's very important when you're seeking out a good cybersecurity barrier and a good cyber insurance policy to embrace this idea that this is new and complex. But what's really, really important to remember is that not doing it is potentially catastrophic for a company. And I just want you to touch on again as we close the nature of it being complex, and that being something that, gentlemen like yourself and companies like yours have the capacity to provide that service. Is that a good way to think about it?
Yes, yeah. And that's why we work with insurance brokers, right? We're not writing insurance. We're assisting those small brokers and the medium-sized brokers that don't have that expertise. It's like, being a doctor or a lawyer, you're not going to try and do that yourself. You're not going to try to manage your money yourself. That's why you hire a money manager, right? So when that's lacking or the expertise is needed, it makes sense to go to an expert to get that expertise, so that then the customer can have some sort of financial quantification and some sort of limits to where he should be. And then, everyone can move forward with confidence. Like you said, you can amend it at any time. If it's broken, yes, but we can fix it. You can amend that. You can get on track at any time.
The feeling someone might have about this being sort of a too complex thing or insurmountable is that's too much of a concern, right? There is always a way to solve this problem is what I'm hearing you say. So, I think that, what I'm hearing is that with the right tools and the right mindset, you can create this notion of cyber resiliency, like you can create sort of safety against theft and fire. Craig, just as we wrap up, do you think that that's a right mindset to have for small businesses, large businesses, business owners, individuals?
I think as long as you take the first step forward, I take that as being the American approach that you can do. So whatever you do is definitely the right approach. I think what Ralph's doing, we're taking a look at the approach from cybersecurity and cyber insurance and kind of mirroring those two together to give you that best closed door, locked type of approach.
Gentlemen, Ralph, Craig with the Tech Collective, your information has been on the screen throughout, and we'll obviously have that in any complimentary information where we post this in the various places podcasts are available. Thank you so much for joining us. And everyone else, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate your time and attention to this. And, leave a comment, leave a like, share it, and tell us what you thought. Thank you again for tuning into this episode of the Cyber Insurance News and Information Podcast. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Visit us on the web at www.cyberinsurancenews.org.